If there is one thing that every business guru can agree on, it's that in order to scale, you need to build a world-class team, a team of A players that are helping you reach your goals, whether that's 5 million a year, 10 million a year, even $50 million a year. You need to have people that you can rely on so you're not bottlenecking the process. But after hitting over $30 million in sales and hiring and firing literally hundreds of team members, the one thing that nobody talks about is after you have that team, how do you get them all rowing in the same direction? How do you get them focused on one specific goal, and how do you maintain that focus for the entire year so that every year's a record year? And that's exactly what I'm going to show you in this video today. Now, full transparency, this is not going to be the sexiest video in the world. Anytime I talk about operational stuff, like, teams and hiring and meetings and organizational charts, it always gets low views. But I can tell you right now that we need to make operations great again, okay? So if you're watching this and you know somebody else who's a business owner, I highly recommend, if you get value from this video, sending this video to them as well, because I've worked with almost 3,000 business owners at this point, and this is one thing that every single one of them unequivocally is missing. I've never had somebody come in and have this one thing, and that is going to be prepared, planned, and highly effective quarterly meetings. So let me walk you through how to do this. At the time of this video, it's March 11th, and so we're actually coming up on the end of quarter one. Now, if you were anything like me previously, quarters didn't really matter too much to you. It just every day and every month was like, let's make more money than last month. But the problem is that without the right systems in place, you can very quickly lose track of what's important inside your organization, because now you have 10, 20, 30 people, all who have different problems and all who think that their fire or their problem is more important than somebody else's. So this is what a good quarterly planning session can solve. So I'm actually going to walk through, this is a screenshot from our project management software. We use Asana, where I actually go through this during our quarterly meeting. I'm going to walk through, like you and I were going through a quarterly meeting right now, what you should be conducting on there. And that way, when you get closer to your quarterly meeting, you can actually review this video, maybe even share this video in your Slack channel with the rest of your team so that everybody can be on the same page. So the first thing is exactly what this image shows right here, which is that you need to have a very structured and specific agenda. If you just get on a meeting and you get everybody together in the same room for 7, 8 hours and you don't have a structured or specific agenda, then it's not going to be uncommon for you to really not get anything done, or for you to spend 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours talking about one small itty bitty little detail that's really not going to have that much of an impact on what the main goals are for the company over the next quarter and over the next year. So you can just steal my quarterly planning sheet right here. No problem. I don't mind it at all. But you want to make sure that you have something that somebody's keeping track of, which is typically going to be, you're going to be the CEO. So you're going to be the one that's leading the meeting. And then you want to have some kind of, let's just say secretary. It can be somebody else along those lines. Some people be insulted by secretary. I actually just use my executive assistant. You could be your director of operations, but you want somebody to make sure that they are checking these things off and kind of keeping you on time. You as a CEO, you're going to be there really more to lead the meeting, where somebody else is almost going to be there more to hold you accountable. So that's number one. You want to make sure you have a really solid agenda in place. Hey guys, really quickly, I'm actually going to have my editor cut this part in, because I realized about halfway through this video that I didn't even talk about who should be on the quarterly meeting. So I want to talk about that really quickly before we go back to the rest of the video. So ideally on the quarterly meetings, you want as few people as possible. Now, I know that might be really weird. That sounds almost counterintuitive. Like, wouldn't you want the whole team and organization rallying behind and giving you their feedback? The answer is maybe, but the problem with that is it's going to take way longer than 6 or 8 hours to get everybody's feedback in there if you have a team of 10, 20, maybe even 30 people. And plus, the whole point of having department heads or a leadership team is that they're consolidating and get the feedback from the rest of the team, and they can synthesize that, meaning they can simplify it and then feed it to you and like, hey, this is what my team is feeling or thinking. So you really want to have, I'd say maximum 5 people, but if you can get it down to like 3 to 4 of your leaders on that, I think it is going to go really, really quickly. And I've actually done both. I've done huge quarterly meetings. I've done with like 5 people, and I've done it with 3 people. And I can tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the fewer people we do, way more potent the actual information is. We get so much more stuff done. Now, depending on the size of your business, what this typical will look like is, like, let's say you're the CEO of the company, then you could have like, let's say a head of sales, you could have a head of marketing, right here. You could have a client success director, all these people right here. So this is going to be like typically you may, depending on the complexity, have a head of like support or billing right here. And these people would be on your meeting with you. And then they obviously have all the direct reports down here. Maybe, depending on your level, you might not have a head of sales and a head of marketing. Maybe you're going to have literally just one person be head of sales and marketing together, right? So maybe you just have a rock star person. So then that person would show up in there. But the most important thing is that when we get into the prep and the day-to-day, they need to be able to change out hats interchangeably, meaning that they literally need to be able to be like, okay, when I review this rock and I propose this goal and we're talking about this, the sales department here, I have my sales hat on. And then when we switch literally 1 second later to talk about marketing, I take my sales hat off and I put my marketing hat on. Okay, so you need to, I know it sounds like a little silly, but you need to be almost like you're talking to two different people, even though it's the same person. And by having that kind of segregation on those meetings, you're allowed to really go deep on the specific topics of each department. And so it's not uncommon for one person to have 2 or 3 hats. And so you need to prepare all those things together. I'll give you a really great example. In our company, I'm technically the chief finance officer, right? I'm both the CEO and the chief finance officer. So when I do the prep in our company, I actually have to do the prep for the financial prep on showing where we're at, our cash, our profits, our cost of goods sold, all that stuff. And I also have to do the work of the CEO and the vision and the casting, what I want the future of the company to be, blah, blah, blah. So I actually have to put these 2 hats on during the entire meeting to make sure that I'm covering both topics adequately, okay? And if you're watching this video and you're at 2 or 3 employees, something like that, then just have a meeting with everybody. It's not that big of a deal, if you only have a couple of people on there. And if you have, let's say, 5 to 10 or 15 people, but you don't have any real leaders, then I would recommend that you start to maybe pull 1 or 2 people that you're not promoting them and you're not saying, hey, you are a head of sales, you are a head of marketing, but this could be something that you are in the future, or hey, you're the most sophisticated or educated person on this topic in our team, and so I want you on this meeting. Number 2 is you want to make sure you do a lot of prep for the meeting. There's a famous saying, which is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, meaning that just a little bit of work up front could legitimately save you hours and potentially even hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars, depending on the size of your business, over the next 90 days, just by being a little prepared. Now, I'm actually going to save the preparation for the very end, because if you don't know what to expect in the meeting, then you don't know what to prepare for. So I'm going to first cover what to do inside the meeting, and in the very end, we're going to go back for the preparation. And actually, we didn't even really start adding the preparation until after I think we did our 3rd or 4th quarterly meeting, and we realized, wow, this would be so much faster if everybody just brought all these numbers and all this data on the meeting and we're already prepared, and we all followed a similar standard format. And so that's what we did, and now our quarterly meetings are actually shorter than they were before, and we're getting out of there in a couple of hours because everybody's coming totally prepared with all of their arguments and reasoning really soundproof. So, or bulletproof, excuse me. So let's get started. The first is going to be the segue. Now, the segue, we actually have this in every single one of the meetings we do, whether it's a quarterly meeting or it is an annual meeting, or if it's literally like a weekly meeting with the team. And the segue is just another way for rapport building. You're just, you don't want to get in immediately and be like, okay, what are your numbers this month? You want to kind of ease into it and get everybody on the same page. The segue for me is typically always 3 things. The first is going to be personal accomplishments in the last 90 days. So I really like talking about the personal accomplishments of my team. I actually do it at every single meeting I have, whether it's a one-on-one, a weekly meeting, a monthly meeting, or a quarterly meeting, because I am very well aware that there is a person that exists outside of this business, right? One of my fiance and I's favorite shows is Severance. And although maybe it would be really cool to have like them never have to worry about their personal life, that's not a reality. And so I know that my team members have things going outside their life that can actually a lot of times affect what's going on inside their business, which is why, one of the feedbacks that I've gotten at some of my quarterly meetings and my annual meetings is that my team members want me to share more of like the kind of biohack stuff that I do, the peptides that I take, or the vitamins that I'm on, or my morning or nighttime routine, how much sleep I get, the systems and tools I use, all of that stuff. So I have no problem sharing that with them, because that helps them show up every single day more consistently at like 100% level. And so I always start every single meeting with, what are your personal accomplishments, either in the last week, the last month, or in the example here, in the last 90 days. So a lot of times we'll have people be like, the beginning of this quarter, I set the goal of losing 20 pounds and I did it. I got engaged. I got a puppy. We moved into our new home, right? And so now we're all kind of sharing these personal wins that lets us be a little bit more human and lets us recognize like, hey, we're all here to make a lot of money and make a lot of impact, but I also want you to grow as a person as well. Side note, there's no way I can prove this, but I'd almost bet we have incredibly low attrition in our company, meaning that I actually can't remember the last time that somebody left on their own accord. We didn't let them go. And that's because I think that we care so much about people on their personal side. So number one in the segue is going to be personal accomplishments the last 90 days. Number two is going to be business accomplishments last 90 days. You see, this is going to be really important because what we're going to get into in the rest of this meeting here is going to be, honestly, a lot of critical review. Like, okay, did we hit the goals? Why did we not hit the goals? What could we have done better? How's your team doing? And in business, I think, especially today's day and age with all this like social media and comparisons, it's really easy to think that you're never making enough, that you're never doing enough, et cetera, or maybe you set this really big goal last quarter and you didn't hit it. And so now that's the main focus. Oh, we didn't hit it. That sucks. But in reality, you maybe made some huge strides elsewhere. I'll give you an example. There was a quarter last year where we didn't hit our cash goal for that quarter, but we still really increased the satisfaction surveys for our clients, which is one of the client success goals that we had, is a specific increase in our one-to-one satisfaction surveys with our clients. So, okay, we might not have made as much money as we wanted to make, but at the same time, we created a better product or service for our clients, and so that's a big win. So we go around in the room and we each share a specific business win that we did or multiple that we've done. A lot of times there'll be like 10 or 15 of them and they just rip them off one by one. And they're data driven, they're qualitative, they're quantitative. But the important thing is we're just kind of getting the room ready with a bunch of wins. And then the third thing is going to be expectations, okay? And expectations are going to be, look, I'm here on this meeting because I want to set the goals for next quarter. I want to review this previous quarter, but also I need clarity alongside this. I need clarity alongside that. I think I've gotten last year in one of our quarterly meetings, I think it was my sales director or something was like, I just need a little bit more clarity on what our exact marketing system is, because we have so many different traffic sources and so many different funnels. Like, what's the main one that we're trying to scale? Or for example, one of my client success directors have one time said, like, I just want to know, like, what's the 3 or 5 year goal? Like, what are we trying to take this business to, right? So it gives them an opportunity for me to write this down and be like, cool, if we can cover that, we will. And this is a really great opportunity for them to ask questions that maybe don't make sense to discuss in the day-to-day life of the business. So that's a segue. It should take maximum 20 minutes to be able to do. You don't want to spend all your time on it, but it's a really good way to get started. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to review the previous quarter. So just like everything else we've done here so far, this should actually follow a specific agenda. So you're really going to be doing a couple of main things. The first thing is that you're going to be reviewing dashboards. Now, if you don't have any dashboards, I really highly suggest that you do get some. It's really hard to have meaningful conversations when you're just going off of feelings and wants and desires, right? Oh, well, we did pretty well. We didn't do pretty well. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Oh, well, the lead, our ad spend was down by 30%, and that's why we didn't, we don't have as many book calls. Or our close rate was up by 15%, which is why we took home more profit. You want to be able to really point to exactly what's going well, what's not going well, and you want the dashboards to be able to help you do that. And, I have different videos where I go through dashboards, and this is something that we help with our clients. But ultimately, if you don't have the fancy dancy dashboards with all these things here, just get some Google Sheets together. And this goes back to being prepared beforehand. Even if you didn't have the Google Sheets and you didn't have the dashboards, like for example, sometime when we're doing like new projects or testing out new things, I don't have any data dashboards or Google Sheets. I'm literally just manually counting things inside Stripe, or I'm manually counting things inside Slack or inside Calendly. So don't think of this all or nothing mentality where it's like either I have this perfect dashboard or I don't have any data. Bring the most relevant data that you have on there, and once again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's going to have a huge impact. So the first thing we do is review the dashboards, and you can go as deep as you want to. For example, we have what's known as a master dashboard, and then underneath the master dashboard, we have individual dashboards for sales dashboard. We have a marketing dashboard. We have a client success dashboard, right? And so all of those numbers, of course, lead up to the marketing dashboard. So if you have just one dashboard, that's totally fine. That's great. Just look at the most important numbers on side there. If you have sub dashboards, then you might want to double click into some of those other numbers as well and see what's going well and what's not going well. And if you have a leadership team on here, what should be happening is they know that you're going to come to this reviewing dashboard section, and they know that you know what the KPIs are going to be. So let's say, for example, on our client success team, let's say the offer rate, meaning how many of our current clients that we're trying to sell on something else on our back end offers, maybe it's lower than what the KPI is. Let's say your KPI is 80% and you're at 50%. Well, when you're on that section on there, you shouldn't even have to bring it up to your client success director. They should really say, hey, Ravi, I know you're going to say, why is the offer rate at 50% instead of 80%? And the reasons is because of XYZ. We had to let a client success manager go, or we had too much capacity and we had to focus on fulfillment over sales, which is always what you said the priority was, or whatever the reason is behind it. So if you're pointing something out and it's low, and that person's like, oh yeah, I don't know why that number's low on there, and you've made it clear that this is an important number for the business, that's why you have it on the dashboard, then that's a red flag, right? Now, cut everybody some slack in their first, 1 or 2 quarterly planning. Even I was terrible when I first started. And actually, one of the things that we'll do now is we'll actually help our clients plan their quarterly meetings. But you cut them some slack in the beginning. But if they're just like not paying attention to these numbers, then you need to identify, is the number not important, or is this person not just taking this job seriously? So look at the dashboards. And as a side note here, you should be looking at the dashboards. I look at them every single day, but at least once a week with your team to look at all the KPIs and numbers that are going involved. So it shouldn't be like you haven't looked at this number in an entire quarter, then you look at the number and the number's off. You should obviously have a little bit more frequency behind it, but still you need to review all of them and make sure you're all on the same page. Okay, the second thing that we're going to do here is we're going to review our financial tracker. So this is actually something that I created personally. If you have like a P&L, or a profit and loss statement, you can look at that as well. But you just want to be pointing out to the leadership team, depending on the level of transparency that you want, how the business is doing, how much cash is on hand, what our quarter over quarter profit margins are looking like, what's our take home, are we seeing a higher cost per acquisition, lower cost of goods sold, right? I've learned, another great example is what's the percentage of labor to the overall organization? What percentage should each department be? I've learned personally that although sometimes it's scary to share some of these numbers with your team, which I've felt that as well, if you have a really great leadership team, by giving them these numbers, you're enabling them more. So, I'll give you a few great examples. If your profit margin is lower than you want it to be, and you share that with the team, and you say, my goal is this percent profit margin, which means that we need to make these different departments have a lower percentage of labor, a percentage of the overall cash, well, then you can get your leadership team on board with maybe some budget changes that you need to do. For example, one of the recent things that we've done is we've adjusted our appointment setters commissions from 5% to 3% over the last 2 quarters. Now, if I just came out and said, hey, we're going from 5% to 3% to the setting team and to the sales director, they might get some resistance, some pushback. But because on these meetings, I share with the sales director, hey, I really want sales to be roughly 12% of the total cash that we're doing right now. Right now it's 15%. When I looked at all the things inside of here, because we're getting inbound leads for these appointment setters, I don't feel like they're doing as much work as they were previously. And so I think the best way to do it would be lower from 5% to 3% so we can raise that profit margin up. I can spend more money on marketing, advertising, et cetera, et cetera. And by showing him that on that quarterly meeting and getting his buy-in, well, now I only have to do it one time, and then he can then go do it to each individual setter and handle the implementation of that versus me just saying it to his whole team at the same time. First of all, it's not fair to him. And second of all, they're not really seeing why I'm doing this in the first place, okay? So step number 2 is always review financials. And step number 3 is going to be review rocks. Now, what are rocks? I'm not talking about the things that you have to go kick whenever you were a kid. Rocks are essentially goals, okay? So these are your quarterly goals. And this is how you get people moving in the same direction. This is how you get everybody kind of rowing in the same direction. And I could have a totally separate video on rocks and how to set them up and how to set goals inside organization. So I'm going to try to keep it really brief inside of here. But if you check out nothing else in this video, pay very close attention to this part here. So rocks are the goals that you have for the next 90 days in your organization that you want to hit. The way that you set them is typically you have a main rock, which is a company rock, which in my opinion is almost always a cash rock. So I want to make, just for easy numbers, $2 million, $3 million this quarter. Maybe you're watching this. I want to make $100,000 this quarter. And so that's the total cash rock that you have. That's the number one goal that you have as a whole organization. You update it every single week. Everybody in the company can see that rock, et cetera, et cetera. And then from that rock, comes what are known as sub rocks, right? And these are rocks that will help you reach that rock. So let's give a really good example. Let's say in a quarter, you want to hit $1 million in new cash for your business. So then your sales team or your marketing team should figure out, okay, let's say, for example, let me just run some math here really quickly. Let's say, for example, that we have a $10,000 product. And 1 out of every 3 booked calls that we book will close on this $10,000 product. So that means that if I divide 10,000 by 3, it's $3,333 we're making for every booked call that we get inside the company. So if I want to make $1 million, so let's say $1 million in the quarter, and I divide that by how much money we make per call on average, then the marketing rock should be 300 booked calls. Because if we get 300 booked calls and 1 out of every 3 calls turns into a $10,000 deal, then every call is worth $3,333 for us. And so 300 booked calls would reach the $1 million rock. It is as simple as that. That is how you set a goal for the organization. Don't make it fancy and don't make it off of hopes and dreams. Don't say, oh, there's this pie in the sky goal, and really we should be making $15,000 every 3 calls, so I'm going to adjust it for that. No. Look at the most historical data that you have. So the past 6 months, the past 12 months, and say, okay, on average, these are the numbers here, so this is what we should get, okay? Another great example of this would be on the client success side. So let's say you want to make $1 million inside the company, and you know that if you get 300 booked calls on the marketing side, that you'll hit the $1 million. But we all know that business doesn't go the way that we would want it to. So what if we could add some kind of margin of error? Well, what if your client success team set a goal for $200,000 for your client success team in back-end sales? Well, that's pretty cool, because now the worst case scenario is that marketing, let's say, doesn't hit their rock, or sales doesn't close 1 out of every 3 deals, and so you're a little bit lower, but you're being made up by the client success side of things. So really now you have, instead of organizations or departments pitted against each other, you now have them on the same side. So it's like when you're meeting every week with your leadership team, it's like, hey, Bob, James on the marketing side, he's not doing as well as we had hoped. He's having a hard time scaling ads. So we need to hit this $1 million goal. So what can you do with the current clients that we have? Or you go over to the sales team, right? And you say, hey, marketing isn't able to get 300 book calls. What do we have in the pipeline right now that you could liquidate that could make up for, let's say, 10 booked calls this week that marketing didn't get? Okay, so that's how you start to have these different rocks here, all feeding up to that main rock, which in my opinion should almost always be a cash goal inside the organization. Now, the larger and larger organization gets, you might even eventually start having sub rocks underneath this. So a sub rock of, let's say, the 300 booked call goals could be, for example, for us, we have a certain number of views that we want to get on our social media channels that quarter, because we know we got this many views last quarter and we had this many booked calls from it. So if we want our organic to represent 50% of our booked calls this quarter, then we need to get, I'm just making numbers up here, let's say 1 million views in order to get 150 booked calls from that. So now our head of media now has his own goal of getting 1 million views this quarter. And if he gets 1 million views this quarter, that's going to lead up to the booked call goal here for 150 booked calls. And then if we hit that, that's going to lead up to the goal here for $1 million in cash. So that's how you set up the rocks inside of an organization, and you can have them all feeding into each other. So that way everyone's rowing in the same direction. So if you have this person over here and they're like, hey, I really want to, let's think of something that the media person could do. Like, I really want to increase your branding. I really want to make your brand more luxurious and more and nicer and separate you from your competitors. It's like, okay, you could do that, but in reality, that's like more of a nice to have. And what I really need is you to hit 1 million views. So if you think that's going to help us hit 1 million views, by all means. If that's not going to help us hit 1 million views, forget about that. We can talk about it in the future. Let's just get 1 million views, which will lead to the 150 book calls, which will lead to the $1 million that we have in cash for the company. Now, for the vast majority of people watching this video right now, you're going to be totally fine just setting the cash goal inside your organization. And maybe if you have a leadership team, you can start setting those sub goals underneath that, like number of book calls, number of back-end sales, et cetera, et cetera. But if there's a few lessons you need to learn about the goal setting, is that number one, every goal should have one throat to choke. So every goal should have one person who's responsible for it and updating it, et cetera, et cetera. So this could be the CEO, which would be Ravi. Back-end sales could be our client success director, Joe. Booked calls could be our head of marketing, which is Frambo. And so every person has their own goal. The problem is if you have Ravi in charge of this one, Ravi in charge of this one, Ravi in charge of this one, it becomes a little bit of a nightmare to trying to update it and make sure everybody's on the same page with all of it. So instead, I really recommend only adding a goal when somebody other than you can actually own that goal. If you're the only person that can own a goal right now, then just set a cash goal. And inside that goal, you can say, okay, I know I need 300 book calls. I know I need these things here, but you don't have to necessarily officially consider it a rock or a goal in your organization. The other thing about goals when you're setting them is that they need to be what's known as SMART. So that's the acronym that people use. And it's essentially, I think it's specific, measurable, attainable, results-driven, and time-bound. Meaning that you need to make sure it's incredibly specific, so you can't just say, oh, let's make more cash, and you say $1 million. Measurable, how are you going to measure it? How much money hits our bank account? Attainable, if you made $100,000 last quarter, are you going to really be able to make $1 million this quarter? Results-driven, meaning that it can't just be like, oh, let's have more impact. It needs to be like, oh, let's actually see the dollar amount of $1 million in the bank account. And time-bound, meaning it needs to be a quarter long. You need to have it within 90 days. If it's not smart, then don't do it. Now, you don't have to have every one of these elements. Sometimes it's hard to add those things inside of there. But I think that if you were to work with AI or ChatGPT, you could figure out how to make almost any goal like smart. So a great example was we wanted to remove me from having to spend so much work on creating content and build a content research team and stuff like that. And so what we did was, in order to make it smart, we said we wanted to lower Ravi's filming time every single week from 6 hours to 4 hours. So that was one of the things that we made a little bit more measurable, so it'll be easier to say at the end of the quarter whether we hit this goal or not. So that's how you set goals inside of the organization, and that's what you're going to do on the last step here when you are reviewing the previous quarter. You need to look at the previous quarter goals and know, did we hit them or did we not hit them, and why did we hit them or why did we not hit them? As a side note, when you're updating your goals, you can do it. Almost all of the project management softwares today, ClickUp, Asana, all these other ones, they have the ability for you to put the goals inside of there, and we update them on a weekly basis and review them both inside of the department weekly meetings and my leadership meetings on a weekly basis. So you want to review the previous quarter and essentially say the numbers, financial numbers, dashboard numbers, and the rock. Did we hit it? Why did we not hit it? And then we need to discuss that as an organization. The next thing is going to be review and update your mission, values, goals, and issues. Now, I'm not going to go too deep on this section here, because at least on the mission, values, and I'll talk about goals here in a second, because I have different videos that I go into missions and values, but I'm not talking about it because it's not important. It's actually one of the most important things that you need in an organization. If you want a great example of some mission, vision, and values, go to scalingwithsystems.com/careers, and you can see what ours are in our company. But you want to be able to make sure this is an opportunity if someone on your leadership team says, hey, I want to adjust our values, then they have an opportunity to do that, because you really want to make sure everybody is on the same page and everybody feels like they're welcome and heard inside the organization. So unless they don't share your values. So they might say one of our values is extreme ownership, and they might say, oh, I don't want to do extreme ownership. Well, for me, it's like, well, you just shouldn't actually be here because I only want people that have extreme ownership. So you want to review and update your mission and values, and then you want to go through what's known as your goals and your issues. So now you're actually, in this previous one, you are reviewing the previous quarter's goals, and in the new one, you're actually going to be proposing new goals for the quarter. So let's say last quarter was 300 book calls. This quarter, you might say 350 booked calls. And so they're going to present to you not only what their rock is and their goal, they're going to say, this is how it's smart, and they're going to say, this is how we're going to achieve it. By doing these 3 or 4 things here, I'm going to need help from the setting team and the media team in order to make all of this happen, but this is what my proposed rock is for the quarter. And so now we're all going to vote on whether we agree with it or disagree with it. We're going to poke holes in it. Well, what happens if this goes wrong or that goes wrong? Oh, you're relying on this big joint venture. Well, what if that falls through? So, okay, you need to have 2 joint ventures in your back pocket so that you can hit this goal, right? So this is a really good opportunity actually for someone to try to figure out how you're not going to hit your rock or your goal. That's a really great thing to do, because you can point out all of the flaws and then you can patch up all those holes so you have the best chance of actually hitting it. And then the issues. And the issues are exactly what they sound like. Problems in your organization that have not yet been resolved. And so if you think that you don't have problems, then you just haven't asked any of your team members. You have an unlimited laundry list of problems inside of your organization. What you need to figure out is you need to be able to prioritize them. And that's going to go, we're going to talk about this in the section here in a little bit called Identify, Discuss, and Solve Issues. But this is where people are going to start just literally one by one. You. What are the biggest issues in your department right now? Oh, we need to have a better ascension pathway. I want to get awards for clients. We don't have enough booked calls coming from appointment setting team. Boom, boom, boom. You're just writing it all down, or your executive assistant's writing it all down for you to discuss a little bit later. Okay, so that's review and update the mission, values, and goals. Next, we're going to go to review and update organizational chart. This is something that I have a different video on my YouTube channel as well that you can check out. But an organizational chart is one of the most powerful things in your organization. It's essentially letting you know who's in your organization, but more importantly, who is responsible for what, both their KPIs and their numbers. So what we do in this section here is we'll actually pull up our organizational chart, which we keep updated at all times. So let's just say you have the CEO, which is me, and then all of these different heads right here, and then underneath them is all of their different heads as well. And you pretty much look at it and you say, hey, do we need to adjust anything on this organizational chart, right? So, maybe they need to say, hey, this person isn't performing well. I want to discuss whether we should let this person go or not. Maybe what we've done before, for example, is let's say this is head of marketing. We used to have our appointment setters that worked underneath the head of marketing. But after one quarter, what we said was like, you know what? This head of marketing, it's actually really hard for him to do both paid ads and deal with the appointment setters. So what he suggested was, well, what if we move the appointment setters and we put them underneath head of sales? So that was something that we changed. We moved it from the head of marketing over to the head of sales so that he was responsible for it instead. So this could be 10 minutes long if nothing needs to change. It could be an hour long if there's a lot of stuff that needs to change inside the organization. But the point is that you're making sure that the structure of your organization matches what you have for your goals that coming up. So let's do another great example here. Let's say that you want to hit 300 book calls this quarter, and you've never hit 300 book calls before. The closest you've gotten is 100 book calls. And so one of the best ways you're going to be able to do that is probably through paid advertising. But what if nobody in your team currently has the skill sets on paid advertising? Well, do we need to join a coaching program? Do we need to hire somebody who's good at paid ads? Let's put them in the organizational chart. Let's set a goal for hiring this person in the next 30 days. So that way you can make sure that you hit your goals. So the next one is establish next quarter rocks and cash. This is when we are actually finalizing all of our rocks and goals for the next quarter. Now, I understand that I've actually heard this before. What's the difference in setting the goals right here and establishing them here? This is when they're pretty much presenting them or preparing them, saying, hey, this is what I think it should be. And we all look at it and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I like it a lot. Establishing it this is where there's the point of no return. You're putting this in Asana underneath goals. You're going to announce it to the entire company. We're saying definitely now that we know who you have on the organization and what you have at your disposal, this is definitely what it's going to be. And like I said before, it's always a function of typically cash at the very top. I want to make $1 million this quarter, and then what do I go down below it? So this is when it's now done deal. You can't adjust it after this because we've spent all the time, energy, and effort saying that this is going to be what it is, which is why you need to be prepared before you come into this meeting. Because if you're not prepared, you might say something like, oh, let's do 300 book calls, but then you look back in the data and you figure out you've never even hit 100 book calls in a quarter, and so now you're always going to be falling behind. And that's why one of the things about the goals is that they need to be attainable. You don't want to always be throwing goals that are like, oh, I'd love to make 10 million in cash this quarter. That's not attainable. You should be hitting at least 80% of your rocks, okay? So last kind of stop here. If we have enough time, let's go through these one more time, make sure everybody understands we have a plan. Yes, we're all good. Okay, this is the cash goal. These are the rocks goal. Let's add it into Asana. Now, at this point, let's say that your meeting is roughly 6 hours long. Well, roughly 50% of your meeting should be done at this point, about 3 hours of work, which means that you're going to spend the rest of the time in the meeting doing what's called IDS, identify, discuss, and solve issues. So you're literally going to bring up all these issues that they added to the list earlier, and any issues that you've had over the past quarter inside the organization that you've added to this list, you're going to go through and you're going to start solving them. Now, let me just show you what this looks like in real life. This is your issues list. I'll just put issues. Okay, so one thing here, 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 one thing here. Okay, so you get to the section. Do you just start at the very top and you say, all right, let's start doing issues. This is number one. Let's just do this. This is number two. The answer to that is no, because not all issues are created equal. There are issues that are more important than other issues. It's actually not uncommon for, let's say, this issue right here to be on our issues list for 4 quarters. We've never gotten to it because, yes, it's an issue inside the organization, but it's not a priority. And you as a CEO, when you're leading these meetings, when you're running these things, you need to be able to say this is the priority. And how do you know what the priority is? Well, you guess it, my friends. It is the freaking rock and cash goal that you set on the last section right before this. So if we know, I said that media one earlier, but if we know that we want to hit 300 book calls and we know that we need to get 1 million views, and this person's like, hey, I want to get our branding better, well, then you need to say, okay, our branding's not as good. Okay, we could talk about that, but let's talk about instead about the fact that we're only averaging, I don't know, let's just say 2,000 views a video, and what do we need to do to get to an average of, I'm just making stuff up here, 10,000 views a video, okay? So which one do you think is more important for getting us to the 1 million view mark, which is going to get us those book calls, which is going to get us that cash goal? The branding or getting more views? Obviously, it's going to get more views. But if you don't follow this right order of operations, if you don't start with the cash goal and then the rocks underneath that, then everything seems like it's an equal issue. So in reality, you have to start, you do this section last so you know what you should talk about. Because like I said, you could have something literally on your issues list for 2, 3, 4 quarters, and that's totally fine. And if there's one thing that I've learned in business is that you need to be totally okay with chaos. You have to be ready and okay with things literally not being solved for a year or 2 years, because you'll never have a perfect business where every single T is crossed and die is audited. There's always going to be something that you can solve. And so really what you need to do as a CEO is say, I know that that's a problem, and I know you brought that up for 3 quarters now, but this is the thing that's going to prevent us from hitting the goal, so let's talk about this. And that's all you do in this section. You just literally go, this one, okay, let's talk about it, cross it off. This one's next, let's talk about it. This one's next, let's talk about it. This one's next. Okay, we're at time. Let's put these all on our weekly ones and let's move forward, okay? So moving forward at this point means that we're going to go to next steps. So what are next steps? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. You are going to say at this point now we've established the rocks that we have, the goals that we have, who we need to hire, who we need to fire. And so we pretty much need to put the system and plan in place to execute it. And most importantly, we need to let the entire organization know about it, because you have to remember, up until this point here, we've literally just had a meeting with these top people, your leadership team. And so you might just say, hopefully everyone gets on board, or you need to make sure that there is a system in place, whether it's a company-wide meeting, a State of the Union address, a Loom video, whatever else it is, where every single person knows all of the goals in the company, so that everyone's rowing in the same direction. So you want to set up those next steps so that you can make sure that, okay, we said in this video here that Bob needs to be let go. So James, are you going to let Bob know that he needs to be let go? Yes. When are you going to let him know? Tomorrow? Okay, great. And also we know that we need to hire a media buyer. Let's create a task around that in a recruiting pipeline, and let's set the date for the next 14 days. And Sarah, you're going to take care of that? Yes, I'm going to take care of that. Okay. So you're just making sure that all these things that you've talked about this whole time, it's not just what my dad used to say, which is mental masturbation, which is like we all talked about it and got all excited about it, and then nothing's actually put into action. So that's where you actually want to start putting pen to paper and making things happen. And the final thing that you'll do in the next step section is you will actually schedule the next quarterly meeting. And just as a tip here, what we do in our organization is we do 2 virtual quarterly meetings and 2 in-person quarterly meetings, right? So we have one coming up at the end of the month here. That's going to be virtual. And so that makes it easy. Nobody has to fly in, blah, blah, blah. And then we do 2 in-person ones. So that way we can kind of get to know each other, like almost like a little company retreat a little bit. We spend some time, and I think there's a little bit more magic happens when everybody's in the same room, okay? And then finally is the conclusion, and that's pretty much where you go through and you rate how the meeting went. You say, hey, this quarterly meeting was really great for these reasons here on a scale of 1 to 10, and then you say something like, whether your expectations were met or not. So in the very beginning, you pull up what this segue here said here. Bob wanted to make sure that we covered what our real marketing system is. Hey, Bob, now that we're in the conclusion here, do you feel like you understand what the real marketing system is? You know what? Honestly, not really. Okay, let's talk about it for just a couple minutes here so that you at least have that taken away, and so you don't think that this whole meeting was a failure, right? So then you conclude. Now, this entire thing was our quarterly meeting. Like I said in the very beginning, how do we make this as effective as humanly possible? My friends, it is by doing prep, okay? It is by making sure that you are telling all of your people 14 days before you have your meeting, do your work. And what is the prep that they have to do? They are essentially going to look at every single one of these things and you're going to show them what you're going to talk about. And so they should already have the best business accomplishments and the best personal accomplishments in the segue. They should already have all their data and the reasons why their numbers haven't hit or have hit when you review the previous quarter. If they want to adjust the mission, vision, and values, they should have the things that they want to propose to you there. If they want to make changes to the organizational chart, they need to say who and why and what changes they want to make. If they're all going to have rocks that they want to propose, so they need to already have the rocks that they need to propose, and then to have a bulletproof reason why it should be the next rock and be prepared to defend that when other people challenge it. They need to be able to talk about all of the biggest issues in their department after they talk to their team and be able to present it on there. And if they come to the meeting with all of that stuff there, then each section you're going to blow through it with a breeze, and you're going to be very confident going into the new quarter. If you skip the prep step and you just say, okay, yep, just show up this random day, don't be surprised when you only get 50% of the meeting done. And don't be surprised when it feels like you really got nothing done. And don't be surprised when you leave the quarterly meeting and instead of feeling energized and ready to freaking crush it starting the next day, you feel exhausted and you feel like, oh God, I got to do all this research and all this homework to even see if this is possible in the first place, right? So do the little bit of the prep in the very beginning, and I promise you it will be worth it for the whole meeting. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, how to prepare for and execute a highly effective quarterly meeting. If you are a business owner and you just want our help scaling your business and implementing and licensing some of our systems just like this, I recommend going down below and booking a call to speak with myself or one of our team members where we can walk through exactly how we can do that for you. And if you are maybe getting into this channel for the first time, you're watching some of my content, and you want a little bit more help on some of my free stuff on exactly how do you build and manage a team, be sure to check out this video right here.